Shut up and sit down.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mental Health Mentorship and Megapixels. It's great to see you again. As you can see, I have a nice used Rode condenser mic, and it's awesome. I don't need to stick my face into Old Broken Mic anymore, but Old Broken Mic's back there because of his significance. Nonetheless, as you can probably tell, I have a lot of energy. It's 11:30, so I'm taking advantage of the energy. This is the upper side of the spectrum. So right now, I'm sitting somewhere there on the down and upside of bipolar 2. So how it works is I have to tell myself not to go too far to get hypo, and I try to slow my speech down, although I let it run away sometimes. And the bad part about it is that, I looked just to check if the waveform's okay. The bad part about it is that I get a lot of ideas, but I jump from one thing to the next and I never complete anything. And I think about a lot of things, but kind of don't ever get them finished. So it's a trade-off. On the other side of the spectrum, well, on the advantageous side of this side of the bipolar spectrum is the amount of energy that I have and the enthusiasm and the excitement. And this is kind of the nice feeling side. People refer to it as euphoric even. Nonetheless, so let's leave depression for when I'm depressed again. But for now, we're going to use the energy because depression is inevitable. The fall will come, and I've become accustomed to this. I'm getting used to it. And in order for me to learn to be okay during those times, I need to know that I've used these times as much as I possibly can. And I think maybe that's something to point out to anyone that's beginning their journey, having been diagnosed bipolar or having ADD or ADHD, that learning yourself and figuring out when you have excess energy and what to do with it in order to balance the load that's coming so that you don't end up feeling worse in that load that you aren't doing anything. Going to the gym helped push the energy level up as well. And while I was there and throughout the weekend, I got pulled into a topic of discussion that I want to put out this week. It's something I've thought of before, and I think it was inspired by a new, let's say, genre of photography that I tried and I'm really liking, and perhaps we'll talk more about in the future depending on where it goes. But nonetheless, it all fed into the thought of self-image. Now, there are lots and lots of videos, I'm sure, about this. I'm going to speak to a very specific population sample, but I challenge you to take what I'm saying about this population sample and transfer it into your ethnicity and where you live in the world. The population sample is mine, the Indian South African. So what I mean by Indian South African is, for those who don't know the history of South Africa, back during the colonists, then pre-apartheid and apartheid years, the British government, I think it was, that started the pull of migrant Indians from India to South Africa happened. It was the late 1800s into the 1900s where Indians were offered a form of labor in South Africa. And as a result of there being so little opportunity, I guess, in parts of India, they came over to South Africa under a form of labor that was known as indentured labor. There's a really great book that I've been reading, and I'll put a screenshot of it up there and link it below, that talks about the history of the Indian people in South Africa. And it's so interesting that I, shamefully so, in the beginning of my life, and for reasons I'm going to discuss today, did not actually want to know the history. I was embarrassed by it, and I'll explain why. Essentially, I would like to challenge you to take this story and apply it to your ethnicity. So people who moved from the East to the West, or from wherever you may have, your families may have immigrated, or if wherever you still live and the divisions within your own country. I challenge you to not just accept the general consensus that is put out there. And by that, I mean the generic health standards that are published in popular magazines or even that you read on the internet before trying to do things for yourself. And what I mean by that is, especially in terms of self-image, which is what we're going to talk about now, we are easily influenced by popular media, which I would say into the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s was really toxic and controlled how we perceived ourselves, how we perceived good looking, how we perceived strong, dominant, and powerful. And it's formed a lot of bad interpretations of the world for a lot of people, and myself included. I mean, I was born in 89, so youngster during the 90s, and then primary school and high school in the 2000s. And why I'm aiming this specifically at South Africans is, if you look at South African history, it was at the end of the late 80s that the country abolished apartheid. And look, the dates may not be 100%, but our first democratic election was in 1994. So I was 5 years old by then. We were living on an area called the Bluff. Okay, and for the sake of not making anyone angry due to how we refer to race, we are going to talk about race groups as defined by the South African census. This is a publicly published document, so take it up with them if you don't like the words I'm using. We will talk about white, referring to Caucasian people of European or other descent. We are talking about black, which refers to black African. We are talking about Indian, which refers to people of Indian heritage or South Asian heritage. And we're talking about colored, which in South Africa refers to people of mixed race. So back to the 90s. I was a little kid, and my parents grew up with very little in terms of money and opportunity. That's just the honest to goodness truth. I'm third generation South African, which is not that far back if you think about it. My parents lived through apartheid. They grew up during apartheid. They were confined to Indian areas. They didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have a lot of opportunity. Education was segregated. And when they were given the opportunity, come post-apartheid, they obviously worked their butts off and wanted to give me and my sister the best opportunities that they possibly could. What that meant at the time was sending us to what I'll refer to as X-Model C, or predominantly formerly white schools. What this means is, during the segregation days, Indian people, black people, color people were allowed to go to certain schools, and white people were allowed to go to certain schools. And I don't know if there's any scientific fact or statistical fact behind this, but the perception was that the white schools were superior in the way of the education that was provided. I know the things I talk about are controversial. Everyone's going to have an opinion of it. Giving you my opinion. You may think that I'm talking absolute trash and that other schools were perfectly fine and excellent. And academic results still show it today. I'm just giving you the perception and how I ended up where I did. So, in 1991, my parents took the move to move us to an area which was a formerly white-dominated area known as the Bluff. And in fact, because it was pre-1994, we had to get written permission to live there as non-white people. And they sent me to formerly white-dominated schools with my best interest at heart. And this is why I say that the older generations, Gen X, boomers, they went through very different struggles, and a lot of whom will look down on us and say, wow, you were given everything. Why would you possibly think you struggled? So I don't believe I struggled the way they did. I was given opportunity, don't get me wrong. But with that did not come bliss and happiness. It came with its own set of emotional and psychological traumas, impacts that were different to theirs. They probably had those too, but just didn't have the capacity to focus on them because they were too busy focusing on survival. But it is what it is, and it is why millennials and now Gen Zs, most of millennials, are seen as these emotional, weak, touchy people. It's because of what transpired during our upbringing. All right. I also believe that we're moving in a better direction with time. We're becoming less critical of each other. We are becoming more free-thinking and positive when it comes to body image, skin color. I mean, this is where this whole thought came from. So let's talk about me growing up in the 90s and 2000s in white predominant schools. I felt like a fish out of water. The way I speak, the way I enunciate words, the darkness of my skin, the appearance of my very skinny body at the time, my lack of strength when compared to, let's say white dudes, my lack of confidence, which was only compounded by a desire to perform in school and questioning whether my accolades were real or because I was of previously disadvantaged heritage and that was given to me. Because in the move to reform post-apartheid South Africa, that's a lot of what happened. To try and balance the scales, there were various forms of Black economic empowerment, and it had its good, but it also had its bad. And from my point of view, the psychological effect was particularly difficult. Nonetheless, let's talk about that another day. Let's stay on body image and where I'm going with this, specifically Indian body type and body image. I wanted to make a note about something. I believe that we as a human race, as a society, know nothing. Much like Jon Snow, we know nothing. And I say this because of the research I've been doing in academics. You quickly realize that all of what we know is what we think we know, and enough people agree with that we take it as fact until proven otherwise. The truth of the matter is we actually don't know. We hope that what we've assumed thus far is correct and proved to the extent that we have until someone comes along and disproves it. In saying that, I want you to think about that the next time you read a statistic in a magazine that says 49% of respondents said they lost 50 kgs a week by drinking kombucha. There is probably a statistic like that somewhere. Go do your own research and see what demographic that applied to. How big was the sample set? What kind of lives do those people lead? And then, before getting disappointed because it's not working for you, realize that we're all different. And it's been proven that the majority of average testing in the past was based on average age, Caucasian male, Caucasian female. It has progressed, don't get me wrong, but a lot of the data that we still use as benchmarks have not been revised sufficiently. I don't know how possible it's going to be to have a specific metric for every single health measure that we have for the combination of race, lifestyle, ethnicity, male, female. It's just impossible. So I think it's left down to the individual to do some research and decide. Like, I'll take cholesterol, for example. It's part of genetics. It's part of diet. It's part of exercise. Now, I've mentioned in my previous video that I was a very active kid. I did a lot of exercising. I did a lot of healthy eating. I did all of those things, and yet still my cholesterol's not perfect. And the number they ask you to target and be below, and this was told to me by a doctor as well, is not applicable across the board. It's based on a specific ethnic group. And Indian people tend to be out of that range. Does that mean we should pump our body full of medication? That's a choice you have to make. I say try and do some workouts, get exercise in, live a healthier lifestyle before resorting to the medication, which is what I'm trying to do. Nonetheless, coming back to body image, I was interested to see why people of South Asian or Indian heritage, specifically in South Africa, but I guess anywhere around the world, you stem from the same genetic line, why we have a certain body type, and not as an excuse, but to understand what is a realistic target so we don't get despondent when the diets we pay for or the dietitians we see or all of the money we spend on these certain foods don't work. It can be very disappointing. And I'm going to show you a graph. This graph shows you where I was in terms of my weight in 2021, 2022, and where I am now. I was 79.9, just under 80 kgs in the first quarter of 2022. Today, in the last quarter of 2023, I'm 94 kgs, and it has damaged my self-esteem. It has made me feel terrible. It's been 2 years of ups and downs. It's been a tumultuous 2 years. It's been a lot of change since I was diagnosed. And you'll see, ironically, that steep dip to the turning point where I started increasing was when I was the most unstable and at the trough diagnosed, and I increased from there. Now, yes, there is a link between the medication used for bipolar treatment and weight gain. However, I will be the first to admit that I have not done enough, I believe, in terms of exercise and healthy eating, because of coming to terms with these mood changes and trying to figure out my life and our lives together. So I think today I'm sitting at a point where I'm truly putting in the effort. It's not been a long time, and we're going to see how this goes. And maybe I'll report back in a few weeks or months' time and tell you, yes, I've gotten to a healthy weight and I'm feeling great. But you know what? It's about trying. And I just realized something, and here's the scatterbrain happening. I'm not too sure why I even have these headphones on, in all honesty. I was using them to check the levels before I started recording and just never took them off. Nonetheless, see what I mean by too much of energy and scatterbrain? So let's come into this, right? We look at Indian people, and Indian people are what is come to be known as skinny fat most of the time. You look at Bollywood stars, Miss Universe and Miss World winners, the male heartthrobs of the Bollywood scene. And apart from some of them on the male side who are absolutely jacked, most of the population, even if not very overall large, have belly fat or visceral fat around the abdominal area. Now, if you look at me, my wrists are pretty skinny. My legs are pretty skinny, but I'm 94 kgs. And that is mostly visceral fat. What visceral fat is the fat that sits inside between your organs. The other fat that you normally see around your arms and legs is called subcutaneous fat, which means below the skin. Neither is good, neither is healthy. And that kind of explains why Indian men have this kind of pot belly, no matter how hard they try. I believe there are ways to change it, and I'm working on that. But I'm going to link a video below and up here. It's not my video, it's a video I found, but what this dude said made a lot of sense, and he went deep into the scientific side of it. Let me just check the name. The channel is called South Asian Strong, and the video is called Indians Have a Unique Problem in Fitness. And that problem is basically insulin resistance that is linked to our genetics, and the genetics which formed in Indian people as a result of the places they lived and the lifestyle they led, which were driven by the abundance of the types of food that were available, as well as the incidences of famine in India that led the human body to develop defense mechanisms in the form of fat storage in certain areas, which is what we see today. Again, third generation, I'm not that far away. It's not an excuse, but it's about understanding and not setting unreasonable expectations. I mean, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I have all of, these work things to do. I have academics, I have a busy life. I still want to spend time with my family and do this and find time for myself and be healthy. Where does the balance come in, and what is enough? Look, I think it's a personal thing we all have to decide. And I'm all for body positivity, but I want to put an asterisk on that. Body positivity comes with health positivity, I believe. I am now setting my goals based on health, not on how I look. I'm sure that the spin-off will be how I look. And that'll be great, because guess what? My idea of attractive was based on the Caucasian male of the 2000s, which was buff, ripped, confident, big arms. That's when I was in high school. That's when I was in primary school. That's when I felt inferior. And it was a standard I just couldn't meet up to, no matter how much I trained, how much I ate well. I couldn't meet that standard. How much of supplements I took, and now it's gotten even worse. And people are just pumping themselves full of all sorts of supplements to achieve these goals, which in some cases are unnatural. They can be achieved, I believe, but it may take more time and different approaches than what we're currently trying to do and what currently works in men's health magazines or on the internet and what works predominantly for the Caucasian population. Let's be honest. All of us who have moved into Western society have been influenced by the Western, Caucasian, European, American way of seeing things and developing and being healthy. It works for them, for their body types and for their heritage. It's not necessarily going to work for me. And I think that is the very important thing to take away from today's video. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the Durban Indian population, the South African Indian population. So I renounced my religion when I was very young, because here we go. I'm predominantly in this ex-white area and predominantly surrounded by white friends, white dudes. And I mean, I didn't fit in. So to want to fit in, I wanted to not be my heritage, because my heritage was mocked. My accent was mocked. Our culture was mocked. And as a result, in order to fit in as a teenager, I wanted to not be me. And today I'm far away from that. I'm more interested in understanding my heritage and culture than ever. And with that comes this understanding of how I ended up here. So as far as body image goes, the reference YouTube video that I mentioned below, he did a great job in explaining exactly why the Indian body doesn't burn fat or doesn't succeed with the Caucasian, European methodologies of losing weight and gaining muscle. I haven't looked into his program because I'm not convinced that I want to do that. I'm just going to do what is acceptable for me to be healthy. I'm going to do more research into where that line is. I have a rough idea for now. But both men and women, before you hold yourself to that standard that was perpetuated by Western media and that is still perpetuated today, be it body fat, bodily composition, skin type, we need to somehow start moving away from what we were told and what we are told every day is good. And I know it's harder said than done. I don't fully believe it myself, even though I'm telling myself to, and hopefully will change my psychological conditioning over time. But I'm trying to change it, and I'm hoping that it will change with time. What was done is done, but we can do something about the future. So I hope for a future for Mira where she worries less about these things than I do. And it's because of, I believe, the better world we live in today. So the big takeaway here is before you go and set those standards, what you see on the news and on TV and on YouTube and in magazines and what's sold through Instagram influencers and so on, decide whether that's going to work for you based on a bit more research. The YouTube video I referenced below did a great job in explaining why and getting to the health and fitness side of things. And that's not where I'm coming from. I am talking about the emotional and psychological impact of those standards, which we need to work on, I believe, for our own self-esteem, for our own happiness. We keep setting these standards that we base on what we see without doing further research and understanding whether they actually apply to us. Each individual should be doing that research and finding out before you set that standard. And that's the message for today. We're all individuals. We all have a different heritage. Go learn about your genetics, because genetics, I believe, can change to some extent. Again, more research needs to be done on my part. I have done some research into a few studies regarding the insulin resistance and that, and I'll link those studies below. But again, his video does a much better job. And just think about that before you go and set unrealistic targets and end up disappointed or giving up because you're not achieving them. There's nothing wrong with that, setting realistic targets and doing it for the sake of feeling better. Until we chat again, everyone, please reach out with questions or comments. And until then, keep well and keep healthy. It's bye for now.